We have breaking information in the search for Emanuel Haro and the case against his parents.
It's appropriate to have a press conference because it was the defendants in this case that had a press conference first. And they did so in order to tell the public, the media, and ultimately law enforcement that their child had been kidnapped, when in fact that's not what occurred.
The authorities held a news conference Wednesday for the first time since the Haros went on the air August 14th with what is now said to be a lie.
Out of the car seat, and I laid him down and so I could get his diapers ready, and somebody said, "Hold on, that's all I remember."
That says the father, Jake Haro, broke from the story line that he and his wife have been giving the public that he confessed in jail. And on top of that, the DA says Jake Haro should have been in prison. The major break he says a judge gave him in another child abuse case that perhaps could have prevented Emanuel's death. We have a couple big updates to give you today in the case involving Emanuel Haro. The Riverside County District Attorney said that he has an idea of where Emanuel Haro's body is, and he also has an idea of what happened to Emanuel Haro at the hands, allegedly, of his parents. DA Michael Hestrin held a news conference Wednesday alongside law enforcement who have been working this case. And not only did we learn more about the search for Emanuel and the case against his parents, we also learned more about a previous child abuse case involving Jake Haro that goes back to 2018, and the DA did not hold back in saying the judge gave Haro a break and it was a bad decision. Now, before I get to that part of the story, let's get you the latest on where things stand right now in the search for Emanuel Haro and the case against his parents. This is video per News Nation of Jake and Rebecca. Haro in court on Tuesday. They're now officially charged with the murder of their 7-month-old son. Their court hearing on Tuesday was a brief one. They didn't speak. They didn't show much emotion or enter pleas. They are expected to be arraigned on charges next week, September 4th. Now, we did learn in the criminal complaint yesterday that we received that law enforcement believed that Emanuel Haro died as early as on or around August 5th. That's 9 days before his parents went on KABC claiming that Rebecca Haro, the mom, had been attacked and young Emanuel was kidnapped from a parking lot in Yaquipa, California. Got him out of the car seat.
Got him out of the car seat, and I laid him down and so I could get his diapers ready, and somebody said, "Hold on, that's all I remember."
Whoever took our son.
Jake and Rebecca Haro are also facing a felony charge of filing a false report. Law enforcement today said it was within 24 hours that they knew, in their opinion, that the Haro story just wasn't true. A major update from today's news conference was when the Riverside County District Attorney was asked if he had any idea on where baby Emanuel's remains are located. This is per News Nation.
Yes, we have a pretty strong indication of where the remains of baby Emanuel are. So that investigation is ongoing at this time.
The DA wouldn't go deeper into where that is, and he wouldn't flat out say that they know where Emanuel's remains are located. Now, you might remember this image per KABC of Jake Haro with deputies off a highway about 22 miles from his home on Sunday. The remains of Emanuel weren't located at that time. Now, when asked about what happened during that search and why Jake Haro was out there, the San Bernardino County Sheriff said they were getting some level of cooperation from the suspect, but he would not go into more detail. But then a bombshell report today per the Uvalde Foundation for Kids. It's a nonprofit that was originally helping in the search for Emanuel Haro. And they told us that they've learned that Jake Haro confessed while in jail. They say Haro confessed to a Perkins informant. That is an undercover law enforcement officer posing as a fellow inmate. Now, we're working to get comment from law enforcement about that and confirm if they'll tell us if Jake has actually confessed. It does appear, though, at least at the time of this recording, his wife, who is being kept at a separate facility, she is sticking to her story. At least she was on Sunday when Jake was out with deputies because Rebecca Haro gave an interview to a reporter with the Southern California News Group from jail. And we spoke with reporter Brian Roos on Tuesday, and here's what he told us. She said she, stuck to her guns. I gave her every opportunity to say, well, Jake was behind it, or, I'm a victim of domestic violence. gave her ample opportunity to change her story. It's unclear what Haro specifically said in jail, but we did just learn from the district attorney how they believe baby Emmanuel died. More now per the cameras of News Nation.
The filing in this case reflects our belief that baby Emanuel was abused, a victim of child abuse, over time, and that eventually, because of that abuse, he succumbed to those injuries.
Another part of this news conference was information on a previous child abuse case involving Jake Haro when he was married to someone else. It happened in 2018. Haro's then 10-week-old daughter, just an infant, had to go to the hospital. She had broken bones, and Haro was charged with cruelty to children. In 2023, he was sentenced in the case, and the DA says the girl, who's now 7 years old, has lifelong injuries because of Jake Haro. She is bedridden. She can't talk. She has other challenges in her life, all because of the man who allegedly then murdered his 7-month-old son. Now, for as horrific as that 2018 crime was, Haro didn't go to prison. He was given a suspended sentence. It wasn't a plea deal, though. This was a plea through the court. The DA says the decision to not give Haro a steep prison sentence was made by a judge. It was a judge in Riverside County, but they were visiting from San Bernardino County. According to the district attorney, here is what the Riverside DA said about that. He has been on the job since 2014. So this was a case that his office prosecuted.
Judge decided, as is the judge's right to do in that case, he decided that Mr. Haro deserved an extra break and gave him probation and basically 180 days of work release, which ends up being like community service. I will say that it was an outrageous error in judgment by this judge.
The Haros are being held in separate jails, and again, they'll both be in court on September 4th. Joining us now is former federal prosecutor and the founder of West Coast. Thank you, as always, for being with us here on my channel. Very sad case that we've been following out of Southern California. The biggest thing is they've charged this couple with murder, but you don't have a body. It does seem like they have a pretty good idea of what they think happened to Emanuel Haro, the prosecutors do in this case. But how does that complicate things if you don't have the remains? We cover a lot of sad cases here on Law and Crime, but this one is particularly sad. A 7-month-old infant. And you know, cases can be difficult to prosecute, but you can get murder convictions without them, especially in a case like this when an infant was in his parents' custody. So there's really no other logical explanation. Obviously, we know that the mom, Rebecca, told a story that was completely untrue about an abduction and a kidnapping. Obviously, if you're the prosecution, you really want to show the manner and means of death. Obviously, the prior history, which I know we're going to talk about, is going to be really critical. The state's going to want to bring that in an 1101, that's the California Penal Code. But in other states, it's called 404B evidence, other prior bad acts. So I think the prosecution is still going to be able to get there. And look, it's an early investigation. And I know you have a lot of law enforcement folks who are looking for Emanuel. You have cadaver dogs. So probably by the time the trial rolls around, I wouldn't be surprised if we did find his body. You have, of course, the viral moment. That really started all of this was Rebecca Haro and Jake was in this story. We saw it on like KTLA and KBC. She's got this black eye that didn't really add up with the timeline. But I mean, according to prosecutors, this was just a straight up lie, and they've learned a lot more since then. How does that lie factor into how this case could play out now that both of them are charged with murder? It's huge. And, I'm sitting here in Los Angeles right now, and this has been a big deal the past week or so, and it's just going to get even bigger when you have the parents who go on TV here locally, and they're pleading for the safe return of their child, and the evidence doesn't support any of it. We're talking about video evidence, cell phone evidence, other digital footprint. And that's going to be something that jurors will absolutely hate. You're a parent, you're supposed to be protecting your child, and when the child is missing and you're lying about how that poor child went missing, that's something that's going to really put the defense behind the 8 ball here. And I wonder for the defense, because this story is so high profile, you're going to be able, I would assume, as prosecutors, to play the video of them straight up lying if all of this is true that prosecutors have alleged. How do you get a jury, if you're a defense attorney, that would actually be in your favor in this case? It's going to be very difficult. I think the most heinous crime is a parent murdering their own child. I can't think of anything worse than that. And you're right. I mean, the jurors are going to absolutely hate this too. I don't do any criminal defense work, but if I were defending this case, the only possible way to do so would be to point the finger at the co-defendant. That's really the only thing you can do in a case like this. Obviously, they're going to want the trial severed, so they're tried separately. The prosecution will try to keep them together. But, you know, if you are defending Rebecca, for instance, you're going to say that she too was abused and, you know, Jake was violent. And, you know, that's why, you know, she was put in this situation to lie. She too was a victim. I'm not saying I believe any of that, but that's really the only possible defense in this case. To say that neither of them did it, that defies all logic and credibility, and there's no way a jury is going to believe that. Today also, the district attorney talked about an old case involving Jake Haro. Happened in 2018. Horrific details on this one. 10-week-old daughter of his with his ex-wife. This girl, just 10 weeks old, goes to the hospital, has broken bones. According to the DA today, she is bedridden to this day because of Jake Haro, and he was able to get a deal that kept him out of prison. The DA says that he wanted prison in this case, but there was a judge visiting from San Bernardino County. He said he didn't say the name of the judge specifically who gave Jake Haro a break, because in this plea it comes down to the judge's decision, and he decides no jail time for Jake Haro. I think he got work release or something like that. What is the process typically where a case, if you're a prosecutor and you build this case against someone, and then suddenly it's just in the hands of a judge to decide whether or not this person should be in prison or not? It can happen, and here's how it happens. So normally, when there's a plea agreement where either the parties will agree to a sentence, or sometimes the parties will agree that the defendant's going to plead guilty and they're going to argue over the sentence. But when there is no agreement, what the defendant can do is plead open. That means plead guilty to the complaint. They have to plead to all the charges in the complaint, and the judge will sentence the defendant on his or her own without any deal with the prosecution. Again, less common. Now, if you're talking about crime, I don't have a mandatory minimum sentence in prison, and the judge could theoretically sentence the defendant to probation or time served. And apparently, from what's being reported, that's what happened here. You have a felony, a child abuse case where a judge, at least reportedly, sentenced Jake Haro to no prison time over the prosecution's objection. And maybe, just maybe, if he'd served time, Emanuel would be alive today. And that's what the district attorney said today. He was like, this was preventable, which you feel like for that judge, who I'm sure whoever they are, you try to make the right decision in that moment. But then years later, you know, you see this story is now headline news and just has such horrific details. Have you seen, and I know prison for some judges, it may be something it's debatable of whether or not incarceration is the way to go with people, but for a case where you have a 10-week-old girl, lifelong issues, now that she's now 7 years old, she can't walk, she's bedridden, I guess. How many judges out there would not give prison to someone who's responsible for that? It's really shocking, but there are judges that are soft. There are judges that, whether it's their defense background or some sort of civil background, they view these cases differently. I certainly, being a former prosecutor, again, not someone that does do any criminal offense work, I think it's really unconscionable and unfathomable that you would sentence a parent in a child abuse, a felony case where there's a brain injury, fractures, to no time. Again, some judges don't allow it in, but the law does provide for it. If you have a pattern of violence in your home, that those prior incidents, especially a case like this where he's pleaded guilty, he's a convicted felon, right? He's had a child removed from him, his daughter, who's suffering lifelong injuries. I mean, what better evidence is there of the type of person Jake Haro is than that living child that hopefully can come into court somehow and tell her story? There's this report that came down just in a couple minutes of us recording this interview just a little bit before. It's from News Nation, but then also the Uvalde Foundation for Kids reached out to us and told us that Jake Haro, according to this report, has given some level of confession while he was in jail to they called a Perkins informant, which is a member of law enforcement, posing as someone who is an inmate also in the jail. And Jake Haro apparently said something along the lines that he was responsible for Emanuel Haro's death. How effective are those types of techniques in getting not just the confession, but actually when you present them to a jury, and whether a jury believes that the person was telling the truth when they were in jail and said this to an informant, it could be highly effective. There's really nothing better than the defendant's own words confessing to a crime. And you know, a Perkins informant, it's really named after a famous Supreme Court case where law enforcement will plant someone in the jail and hopefully the defendant starts talking. And in this particular case, we've all seen the pictures, right, of the cadaver dogs with Jake Haro there in a red jumpsuit. And sometimes, you know, law enforcement will do that to see if that will prompt the defendant to start talking. Now, you know, you do have obviously Fifth Amendment and X Amendment rights that come in. If it's after someone has been charged and they're assigned a lawyer, you're not really supposed to elicit incriminating statements from them because they're represented. Obviously, the Fifth Amendment applies to a custodial interrogation. Oftentimes, those prison sentences, prison settings, believe it or not, even though they're in prison, it's not a custodial interrogation because law enforcement isn't interrogating them. So the Fifth Amendment often doesn't apply in those circumstances, but the Sixth Amendment does. So a judge is going to have to rule on that confession as well, because believe me, unless there's some sort of plea, Jake Haro's lawyer is going to try to get that kept out. And Jake Haro, we saw him on Sunday. You know, he's out with those cadaver dogs in that area. They didn't find Emanuel's remains there. But it seemed that there was some level of cooperation. When the sheriff was asked about that today, he did say that there was some level of cooperation going on with Jake Haro. At the same time, you have Rebecca Haro, who on Sunday gave an interview, and she stuck to her story that Emanuel was kidnapped, that she was assaulted in this parking lot. They aren't staying in the same facility, and they don't have much communication with each other. How does, especially in her situation, if she's sticking with the story that they were giving originally, and he seems to be cooperating, what does that mean for her case? It doesn't bode well because she's someone that is doubling down on her lie. There's no evidence of this kidnapping, right? I mean, law enforcement pretty quickly debunked it. Again, in this day and age with technology, video surveillance, that's something that police officers, detectives can vet pretty quickly. Now, sometimes criminals, they go down with the ship. They maintain that lie all throughout trial. And we've seen juries here on long crime return guilty. Verdicts pretty quickly. Jurors aren't stupid. They know when they're being lied to. And when there's no evidence of this kidnapping and there's overwhelming evidence that Emanuel died days before, he was even reported missing, well, you know, she better change her story. And the problem is when she do that video, those statements to law enforcement, it's not coming in, right? Those lies, and jurors are not going to like that. And it's going to be very tough sledding for the defense when you have a client like Rebecca Haro who persists in her lies. That's why most of the time defendants are better off saying nothing than saying lies like this, right? And it just goes back to how this story even began in the first place with the lies that she allegedly told TV cameras, and it's just gone from there. If you're a defense attorney, if you're defending either of them, Jake or Rebecca Haro, I mean, are knowing that, and again, he may be cooperating with them in some ways. She apparently is not at this point. But like, are you going for a not guilty verdict if you're a defense attorney, like reasonably in your mind, like you're not going to win this thing? I think a lot of people would say, like, what are you really going for? Like, what's a good outcome for a defense attorney when you take on this case? Yeah, it's a great question. So this is what I would do if I were representing Jake, and if I were representing Rebecca. For Jake, it's really got to be about mitigation at this point. And there's really kind of two schools of thought here. There are some people who think that murderers should not be given any consideration whatsoever, whether they plea, whether they cooperate, whether they identify the body. There are other prosecutors and folks who are watching who believe, listen, if Jake Haro cooperates, he identifies where Emanuel Haro was buried or dumped. You know, maybe he should get something. You know, maybe the possibility of parole. obviously, if you're the defense here, if you got a 25 to life deal, that's really a home run for someone like Jake Haro, given his history and given that this is a murder case, right? It's really not going to get better than that. But even if you keep that open, that possibility of parole, I think that's a win. If your client doesn't die in prison, again, I'm not saying that I would defend anyone like Jake Haro, but whoever is defending him, if you secure that, I think that's a win. I think for Rebecca, obviously she's a woman. She may be able to pull off some sort of finger pointing, some sort of defense that she too was a victim. We've kind of seen her mugshot. I don't know if she was abused or not. We don't know. But I don't think you're ever going to get a walk or not guilty in a case like this. If you do, that's the best defense, lawyering, that I certainly can ever remember. You'd want to put some sort of mitigation package together. Say it was Jake that did this. Jake beat her. He was violent as well. She's certainly going to get some time, but maybe it'll be on felony child abuse and neglect and not actual murder. I think that's what you have to shoot for if you're defending Rebecca. Yeah. And at this point, they have public defenders, and we'll see how this trial plays out. But certainly, the search for the remains of Emmanuel at the time of this recording continue on. Thanks, always great to have you on my channel. Thanks for being with us. Of course, thanks for having me as always. Subscribe to us on YouTube. We'll see you next time.